Good afternoon. Bill Butler, welcome.
Thank you.
Bill is a class of 63 graduate, and we're here today on April 11th, 2013. And I'm Margaret Frondorf, the Director of Alumni Relations, and I'm so pleased to be here to interview you for our SAIS Oral History program. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and we'll go from there. What brought you to SAIS?
SAIS was the logical extension of my undergraduate studies at the American University School of International Service. It was then, and in my opinion remains, the finest postgraduate school in international relations. And it would be the logical place that anybody would wish to pursue further studies after starting it where I did.
And so your vivid memory of SAIS, you probably have several, but what was your most vivid memory?
Vivid in what sense?
It could be academics, it could be Washington environment, it could be a memorable course, it could be on Florida Avenue in your first year.
Yes. I'd been in Washington already 2 years, of course, before I started studies here, so Washington itself, which has its attractions, I'd already settled into. But what I recall of SAIS most vividly from the professional point of view is the combination of language facility and area studies that was available here. Yeah. So I did Soviet studies, and that was not popular at the time. There were, I think, 2 of us in my class who specialized in that area, and there were certainly only 2 of us in the language class, and my fellow student was a native Russian and fluent as a native speaker. Yeah. It was tough going. But the combination of a requirement of oral facility is that opened my opportunities professionally after I left here. I went on to study law. I specialized to the extent one could in Soviet law. To do that, you had to have a command of the language. Yeah. And there was no way, and there still is no way today, to get that in law school. If you don't come in with it, then you're lost.
You segue right into my next question, was talking about SAIS and fitting into your career and your accomplishments. Talk a little bit about that. Talk about what historians would want to know about your career and your accomplishments.
Oddly enough, that's a question I have to ask myself, because I've made arrangements for my personal papers to go to the Harvard Law School, and I've begun, in fact, to package them up. And I'm a person who has worked in personal archives of Russian international lawyers, for example, from the 19th century. So I have some sense for what an archive might be, and what they included that I found useful, and what they might have included that didn't, and I would have found even more useful. And I'm trying to package my papers accordingly. And my background is such that while in the University of London, we negotiated the only bridge between legal communities in the West and the former Soviet Union. That was done through the Academy of Sciences of the USSR and the British Academy in London. An agreement between them permitted direct links between institutes of the USSR Academy and universities in the UK. Mm-hmm. And in the field of law, we were the only ones ever to establish such a direct link. So we opened up 50 or so Anglo-Soviet symposia, all of which were published, and 100 scholars on both sides eventually, over a 10-year period, moved back and forth. Mm-hmm. When the USSR disappeared, Perestroika came in, the rationale for bilateral links had disappeared. After all, if people could travel anywhere to conferences, they don't need to arrange bilateral ones anymore. Yeah. So we didn't. And in fact, that just simply lapsed into history.
You really had to retool at that time.
For Perestroika.
Yeah, just everything that you had worked all the way up to that point. Was that that must have been a pivotal moment in your career.
I regard in retrospect, and to be fair to myself, I think I saw it at the time, that the possibility of that direct link was itself a harbinger of Perestroika. Mm-hmm. They not only wanted the link, they wanted to talk about the types of subjects they never talked about, comparative law subjects, hard subjects that would lead to law reform, and ultimately they did. So by the end of the 80s, I was playing a part at the instigation of the Soviet side in drafting reform legislation that has been critical legislation.
Did you ever work with Jeffrey Sachs?
I worked on a project in which he was involved, but we followed fundamentally different channels,
Sure.
I think.
He's economics, I know, but
Yes, he
certainly a
is.
champion of probably
Yes.
a very forceful voice.
He was a forceful.
Indeed. Now, if you had to give advice to today's students, it could be about anything, the career path internationally, what would...
Well, oddly enough, I just did give advice before this interview began with a student who came up
Interesting.
before you arrived.
What did they
at
ask you?
501. They asked me exactly what you did. What should they do? What doors might be open to them?
Yeah.
And this was a student who already is fluent in Russian and has 2 other languages and is interested in strategic studies and the like. A student with 2 master's degrees, including the SAIS degree. And my advice was that use the language, because that which differentiates this student from her competitors here and elsewhere is her ability to work in other cultures and in other disciplines, because she is, in this case a she, fluent in what she wishes to do. And that will put her apart from most of her American colleagues.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
I lecture in a law school at the moment. I have done, obviously, for the last 40+ years, but American law students cannot speak foreign law. And that means that they have no language background and they can't study foreign legal systems from the inside, but their European competitors can. And it means that to the extent that I'm a partner in a law firm, for example, I can't hire them.
Interesting. Well, that really does differentiate SAIS
It does.
from a lot of the other graduate programs in international relations.
And my understanding of the history of SAIS is that's one of the reasons that the group broke off from Fletcher.
Yeah,
At the end
interesting.
of the war, they wanted to come to Washington and they wanted to emphasize language. And
Yeah.
the Fletcher people preferred to emphasize law, which is not a bad thing, but
Yeah.
not to emphasize the language.
Yeah, and it's still strong today, no question, the language program.
Yep.
Intimidating, in fact, like economics sometimes.
Well, economics is genuinely intimidating, but we understood from the beginning that we would be examined externally, and they did bring in Foreign Service Institute people to give us our final oral exam. Basically, it was pass-fail. If you failed, then you did it again sooner or later.
Yeah.
But I think we also understood that it was absolutely integral to everything else we were doing. And that worked to our advantage.
You remember those oral histories, don't you? Not the oral history, but the oral exam.
The exam I happened to have dealt rather quickly and rather well on, so
Yeah.
I had no problem with it. And the same was true of my other colleague who dealt in Russian. The Russian people went sailing through. We were well taught.
Yeah.
And the emphasis here was on a social science vocabulary, as it should have been. We subscribed to Izvestia as a requirement of the course, and we read it every day, aloud, translated it. We did everything with it. We were well geared for what came next.
Well, is there anything else that you want to share or add when you think about SAIS, you think about your years here before we conclude?
I'm at a university at the moment, Pennsylvania State University, that has recently created a School of International Affairs and incorporated it inside the law school. But what we have been unwilling to do is address the language issue. And we're at a crossroads now. It'll be interesting to see whether we're willing to take that on or not. But of course, they look at other programs around the country, and SAIS is the only one that stands out for this particular feature of its offerings. And I think it is one of the most valuable things that graduates will take away
Well,
from here.
you picked a winner of SAIS
Yes.
50 years ago.
Don't back away from it, is
Interesting,
my advice to
and that
future
is-
generations.
It's extraordinary advice. We're going to pay attention, believe me. Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful opportunity to speak with you, and we hope that you come back to SAIS as often as you can.
Well, we'll see. I gave a course here 3 years ago. You never know what may happen.
We'll have to make that happen again. And thank you so much.
Okay.